Thank you for joining I3 Times Group's first annual summit, where we convene each year leaders from around the world and leaders from across India to talk about India and the India opportunity, and particularly those leaders who are thinking of India, as we put it, three-dimensionally, thinking about India not just as a source of audiences and customers, not just as a source of business and revenue, but a source of learning, a source of innovation, and a source of culture. And we're delighted to be joined today in our first annual I3 Summit with the global CEO of Uber, Dara. Welcome and thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, and delighted to be here, virtually, of course.
Well, it was good to see you in India a couple of years ago, and I thought it'd be fun to chat a little bit about your journey with India personally, intellectually, certainly as an executive over the years, and of course, mostly as CEO of Uber. You know, with all things India, I enjoy sort of starting personally. Do you have a moment in time, whether it was at Uber or even before Uber, prior roles as an executive, even as an individual, where sort of India first became top of mind to you? It's always a interesting question I find asking CEOs and founders around the world.
The first time that I visited India personally was at Uber. It was less than a year into my joining Uber CEO, and the Indian market, you know, it's such a dynamic market. It's so full of possibilities that it became quite apparent to me that I had to go see the market on the ground to truly understand it. So that was the first time I visited India, and it was just an incredible experience for me personally as well as professionally. And for me to see firsthand how integral Uber has become to urban life in India, how much we've changed the mobility landscape fundamentally, and just as importantly, how we were offering economic opportunities to so many people. My being on the ground and experiencing that personally and speaking to other leaders in India, politicians, et cetera, it just became so apparent. So I think, you know, it's actually a two-way relationship. India is very important to Uber. And I think that Uber is also very important to India, and that comes with responsibility. And as a result of that visit, and also folks that we have on the ground, we've continued to expand our product offerings really for the Indian consumer, whether it's autos or motos or high capacity vehicles or rentals, et cetera. India has always been a very, very big part of the Uber journey. I think more recently, and just as importantly, it's on the talent front. You know, I personally actually had a very strong experience when I was CEO at Expedia before I was at Uber. Expedia had a dev center in India that was growing very fast, that was quite successful. We had excellent talent there. So one of the other areas where we have really leaned into our Uber journey in India has been on the talent front, especially on the engineering side.
I think part of why we've been so excited and heartened to be a ground floor partner with Uber over the years is because you all have always, and you in particular, Dara, have had such a multi-metric, three-dimensional take on the market. And it's really inspired us. In some ways, I'd like to give you credit for this event because I think your frame on India has always been multi-pronged, where you're looking at many things concurrently, not just your centrality, as you noted, in sort of the transportation environment in India now, but also the role talent in Uber plays talent in India plays for Uber globally. That's fantastic. One of the things that we observe a lot, Dara, is that, you know, there's no shortage of sort of global storytelling and excitement about the Indian market. And so one of the things we navigate often is sort of expectation, right? When people are visiting India, when people are entering India versus how things play out in practice. How would you sort of frame up that for you? Obviously, it's a market with no shortage of zeros at the end of it across many metrics. But looking back on that visit and sort of the early months of your steering Uber's continued growth in the market, does anything come to mind around, I was expecting X, but it turned out to play out like Y? Just curious.
Well, I think for us, what has been consistent is that India has been an incredibly strategic market. Like you said, lots of zeros, huge population, young population, connected population, and ever more so. I think for me, has been really important in that the Indian consumer is extremely demanding, right? They're demanding in terms of price, they're demanding in terms of quality, and they're very much demanding in terms of service as well. And so you can look at that in one of two ways, which is, oh my God, there's going to be a hard market to get into, et cetera. Or the way that we look at the market then and the Indian consumer is that if we can make it in India to some extent, we can make it anywhere.
I love that.
And you know, and it really is true. This is, listen, we don't take it for granted. The Indian market is a difficult market to compete in, and it's a difficult market to succeed at scale. And if you're coming in with the attitude that we're a global company, and if our products work in the US and Europe and a couple of other countries where they're just going to work in India as well, you will get you will get killed because the Indian consumer, because of the demanding nature of the Indian consumer, you really have to build locally for India. Obviously, there are benefits to being a global company and having a service in many, many countries. But if you try to be average in India, you're going to lose. And so our approach has always been to hone our product in India in an India first way. But then there's another advantage there, which is to some extent that honing of your product creates opportunities into other developing nations. To some extent, kind of India is a test ground for us to hone our local product because it's such a large market and such a large opportunity, but also because it's such a demanding market. And then some of the innovations that we build in India, we then take global, especially to other developing and emerging markets as well.
I love that. There's so much in there. You know, one of the things that I've said personally, having spent 15, 16, 17 years helping global companies navigate India is, you know, when I host folks in India, I don't say welcome to India, I say welcome to the world. Because in many ways, the Indian market is a microcosm of all the world's markets in one market. And again, I think you stumbled into an insight that we speak often about at TimesBridge. And I think you've also noted something that we see often in India as well. My favorite word for the market is coexist, meaning you have a lot of things, sometimes juxtaposition sitting next to one another. On the one hand, Indian consumers have propensity for global companies and global brands, but are also very demanding and are looking for service. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to, I think Uber's just expanded into its 100th city in India. Extraordinary, and congratulations. Just sort of how you've thought about scale in the market. In the early years, obviously, there was a huge investment made in India's biggest metropolitan centers. In the last few years, it appears as though you've really taken great strides to have continental scale, if you will. Talk a little bit about those decisions and how you got there.
I think that there's a standard strategy for any local on the ground company, and we certainly are local and we certainly are on the ground, which is Uber has always started as a urban product, right? We have started in the larger cities of the world, and India has plenty of large cities, global large cities. And so when we, in the early days, when we got into India, we tend to focus on the bigger cities out there, just like we do in other countries. What's different about India is that the next, call it, level of cities, you know, whether it's 100 cities or 200 cities, 300 cities, these are significant cities in terms of population. Often there are significant local differences and habits in terms of the consumers. So we have just consistently been expanding our scope from, call it, the top tier cities, top 10 cities in India, into the next tier, because we feel the opportunity is great, and because we also think that it's a responsibility. If you think about Uber and how much of a part of people's lives we are in terms of providing mobility, but also providing earnings opportunities, we think that it's part of our responsibility to reinvest into the market. And we're certainly in for the long game in India so that we can take, you can expect the larger markets are more profitable, and we can take those profits and essentially reinvest them into the next tier of cities. So we see a long, long road as it relates to India, quite literally, and expansion into additional cities and bringing Uber to a higher and higher percentage of drivers and households in India, wherever you happen to live.
One of the other things I say to folks when they visit India, sort of welcome to the future. I mean, the thing about India is sort of it's the past, present, and future sort of in one market as well. An ancient culture that also is sort of revealing to us what the future looks like. Some of our past conversations, you've talked about and framed India as a critical transportation innovation market for Uber. Can you give us a glimpse into what's coming down the pike and what you mean by transportation innovation more generally? Obviously, you're a leading position from a classic ride standpoint and classic vehicle standpoint, but love to kind of get some thinking and reflection from you on transportation innovation in India and what India has taught you on that front.
If you think about where Uber came from, we were essentially a ride-hailing company in the early days, right? Push a button and a car shows up. It's a delightful experience and a super important one in terms of everyday life. The way that we think about our transportation business now is much more of a transportation platform. Push a button in order to get from A to B, and we will offer you up multiple ways to get from point A to point B in a particular city where you live in. It's not just about car hailing. It's not just a taxi product, but it truly is an everyday transportation product. And so what we've been forced to do then is to innovate on mobility products for additional use cases. And India has been a real innovation hub for us as it relates to those kinds of the new products. So if you look at, for example, our rentals product, you can push a button and rent a car on Uber. That was a first that we introduced in India, and we have expanded across the world. We have a product in India. It's quite common to rent a car or hail a car to go from city to city. That's not a behavior that you see in the West. It's certainly not a behavior that you see in the US, but it is a common behavior that you see in India. So our intercity product, for example, is another example of a product that was uniquely Indian, and we're looking to expand around the world as well. We talked a little bit about getting into some of the smaller cities, our 100th city in India as well. That also forces innovation for us around affordability. We want our product to be affordable to the highest percentage of users in any country. And that has resulted in innovations such as autos and hailables as well. And again, those are innovations that we drove in India and now have expanded all over the world, because we do want to increase our affordability anywhere where we are, whether it's India or Brazil or Mexico or the UK as well. So India, it's a combination of the talent that we have on the ground. It's a combination of the market. It's a very, very fast moving competitive market. And it's also a large market. We've tended to look at some of these mobility innovations, test them out first in the Indian market. And again, if they work in market, then we can expand them all over the world.
Can you talk, one of the questions we get often from executives around the world as they're thinking about the Indian subcontinent is, the crass way to put it is sort of org chart questions and organizational questions around how to think about delegation, particularly on the product and engineering side, and how to really unleash innovation. Obviously, you guys have had a lot of success on the product side in India and the software side. I think you just recently announced an integration with WhatsApp, if I'm not mistaken, in the Indian market. Could you just talk a little bit about just organizational design and how you've thought about that, given that in India you're firing on many cylinders, not just go to market, but also creativity for the platform itself. Be curious to hear a reflection from you there.
One of the most important factors as it relates to our success in India is, if you want to make an India first product and a truly first class product on the ground, you have to have teams on the ground. For us, we've always had a very strong culture, GMs, general managers who are on the ground in basically in most cities in which we operate, certainly in countries. And in India, we have had a very large ops team on the ground who is empowered. The GM of India is essentially a mini CEO and is thinking about all of the different ways in which the product comes together, and really has to bring together many teams, marketing teams, product teams, engineering teams, data science teams, and bring them all together to work as a team and really orchestrate all of the different efforts that are happening across the company locally, so that they work for the Indian consumer on the ground. So I think that GM type concept of having a very empowered leader on the ground is incredibly important. For us too, we're very much an innovation company, right? We're a technology first company. I'd say the most significant limiter of our growth going forward is actually how many engineers can we sign on and bring to build at Uber. And so for us, our building up our engineering hubs on the ground has also been incredibly important. We've got a hub in Bangalore. We've got a hub in Hyderabad. And we don't have those teams just work on global projects. We will hand them the leading position in terms of building products that then we want to expand globally. So one area we talked about in terms of affordability is high capacity vehicles, right? If we can get you in a car, can we get 10, 15, 20 people into a van and build it with the kind of Uber magic and Uber delight that we are known for? That product it's clearly a global product. It's not just an Indian product, but we have an Indian engineering product team on the ground building that product for India, but also exporting it all over the world. So we got 700 engineers in India. We're targeting to have over 1,000. And these are engineers who are on the leading edge of mobility and transportation innovation as well. So I think you got to have those teams empowered on the ground in terms of the business owner and the business orchestrator and the captain of all these different areas of expertise coming together. And then if you want to be a leading innovator on the ground, you've got to have engineering teams that aren't a part of the team, but are actually leading product innovation from the ground up.
Fantastic. Just a couple more questions I'd love to ask you. First is sort of about how you think about the importance of Uber leaning into local cultures, if you will. At TimesBridge, one of the things, and Times Group more generally, in some ways we're in the culture business, right? Being in media and distribution. And one of the things we say at TimesBridge is our mission really is to help the world's most purposeful ideas find their way into the zeitgeist of India. Because if you can have kind of cultural currency in the market, in some ways you transcend any individual campaign or any individual growth initiative, right? You've arrived because you're in conversation, you're relevant, you're participating. I think one of the things you guys have done an extraordinary job of is finding relevance in culture around the world, but certainly in India with all your work with cricket in India, your work at the World Cup, Cricket World Cup, I think a couple of years ago, and certainly with individual cricketers in India. Just could you talk a little bit, maybe not even an India question, but just sort of philosophically how Uber generally tends to think about how it connects into the zeitgeist of all markets, but in particular India?
What's super interesting about Uber as a product is, we're building tech. The majority of folks who are at Uber are builders. But we're different from a bunch of other technology companies in that we're essentially building technology that is very much affecting the real world. We're not a digital only company. We are very much a digital innovator who is innovating around real world work, real world, and around logistics and around mobility of people and things in many of the markets in which we operate. That real world innovation has us touching lives in a much more fundamental way than just digitally, right? It's we have millions of earners earning on our platform and earning living on our platform in a flexible way so that they can be their own CEOs and they can work when they want, where they want, how they want. That's a very different way of touching someone than just touching someone within a digital ecosystem. People depend on us for transportation. If they need to get to the airport and they're depending on an Uber, that's a different responsibility than, let's say just getting your search results right. So as a result of that, we have had to, I was at Expedia before, travel company, et cetera. When I think about Uber and how local we have to be, and how relevant we have to be in terms of daily life and how we have to tune our product and then our marketing and our communications, not just to customers, not just to earners, but to governments and the kinds of dialogue that we have to have in order to grow and grow responsibly. The kinds of dialogues that we have to have are much more local, are much more fundamental, and as a result, force us into the zeitgeist whether we want to be there or not. It's just how we do business. The other factor I would tell you that is also important, and it's important in India as well, as India is a big market. It has a very important ecosystem of companies there. So we've also looked to partner on the ground with the Indian business community as well. An example of that is a partnership we have with Bajaj Auto to support post-pandemic recovery of autos in India, or partnerships that we have with the electric vehicle ecosystem to get more EVs on the platform. We got more than 5,500 EVs on the platform as well, and we really have to accelerate that. So it's being on the ground every day, but also partnering with the ecosystem to make sure that your product is delivered in the right way and a responsible way.
Well, I think what's extraordinary to have, in terms of witnessing Uber's journey in India is you're right that by design, Uber sort of occupies space in the zeitgeist, but you guys have taken that to another level, I think, with how intentional you've been with storytelling, with engagement across society, across the subcontinent, and it's obviously part of our mission, so makes our day often. Well, last question, Dara. We talk to executives around the world. Many of the folks watching are CEOs, founders, investors, executives from many countries around the world who are contemplating in India and what role India might play in value creation for them. What advice would you have for executives? Just a few pieces of advice at a kind of generalized level for folks who are contemplating India market entry and or sort of value creation from India.
The first piece of advice that I would give to any executive looking to build or compete in India is you've got to play the long game, right? The market is enormous. The opportunity is huge. There are going to be many competitors in any segment of significance in India. And you've got to be willing to reinvest both in terms of capital and in terms of talent to build in India. This is a 10+ year kinds of bets that you have to make. And unless you're reinvesting aggressively, you're going to have competitors out there who are moving faster than you, building more aggressively than you. So you've got to think about India, big picture, long game. Second point I would make, I just referred to, is the Indian business ecosystem is huge. And so entering into that ecosystem and building out local partnerships is incredibly important on the business front, but is also incredibly important in the public sector as well, as it relates to government regulatory partnerships. And again, those partnerships and that trust takes time to develop, which goes back to my first piece of advice, which is you've got to be in the long game. And then the last point we talked about a bit as well, which is this is, if you're going to win in India, you have to build a truly great product, which for us has translated into having innovation on the ground, and especially engineering and innovation on the ground. Having your own employees take pride in your product, and also pick your own products apart so that we can always build for best of breed, I think is a great formula for success. And it just so happens that the talent, and especially the technical talent in India, is great. So you're winning both ways.
So appreciated, Dara, and lots of insight there, particularly around public institutions. Public institutions are important in India, and we tell people all the time who are used to leaning in markets where you don't really have much interaction with public institutions. In India, you run towards them because there's so much positivity and value creation that can come from those kinds of collaborations. Well, Dara, thank you so much for your time and for joining TimesBridge's first annual i3 Summit. We've long admired Uber and yours commitment to and conviction around India. And as evidenced by this conversation, you're playing India across metrics, across dimensions, and to use your words, the long game as well. So thank you again, Dara, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was a delight.